Well, former Senator Ted Kaufman is gearing up to grill Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner later today over the Treasury Department's program to modify home loans. Senator Kaufman is the head of the Congressional Oversight Panel for TARP, and he joins me now. David Einhorn still with us, as well as John, to chip in on this conversation. And Senator, earlier this week we were talking about the failure of this program to modify loans. So what is it exactly that you want to hear from Geithner?
Well, by the way, Betty, this is not just about the foreclosure program. The Secretary is going to speak on the whole range of TARP. This is something we've scheduled for a long time. Obviously, one of the things that most Americans are concerned about, and which we're concerned about, is how do we get the housing market to stabilize and start turning around? And so the main things I'm going to be focusing on is, how do we get the what does he plan to do to get the banks back lending money? The banks have the money now. Wherever I travel in the country, people say the banks won't loan, the banks won't loan. I'd like to hear his take on that. And the second thing is, we know that corporations have, trillions of dollars cash on hand. How do we get that money out into the community so that they start hiring people and get around this unemployment thing? Because nothing's going to turn around until we do something about housing and do something about unemployment.
Right, and that's been a prevailing theme throughout when you've been seeing, even yesterday at the CEO summit with the president, Senator. And we want to bring David in here because, with TARP, David, I mean, you've been quite critical, right, about how TARP has been handled.
Well, my question is this. We're already 4 years past the peak of the housing market. So we're 4 years into the decline. And it seems to me like we've refused to force the banks to recognize all of their housing losses, and a lot of these modification programs, they're basically subprime loans being extended. And we have the FHA now issuing what are essentially subprime loans backed by the U.S. government. And my question is why do we want to keep modifying things and kicking things down the road? How many more years is it going to take if we go in this direction before we allow the market to clear?
Right. David, those are good questions. And the other thing, to make it even worse, is most of the problems now are not, we're past the subprime loan problem. One of the big problems we have in housing right now is people that are unemployed or underemployed don't have the money to make real, honest-to-goodness, kind of mortgages like you and I have. So it's an additional problem with that. In terms of the TARP, and David, this is just about the TARP. The TARP went out of business on October the 3rd. Betty and I talked about this earlier in the week. So we can't make, the TARP itself cannot make major modifications in what they are doing. We're going to spin out. And all the money will be expired by 2018. So this essentially is the end of the road on this. And I think your questions are good ones. And I think as if I was still a senator, I'd be talking about, okay, I'd use your language. Here we are. I think it was an excellent statement of the question. What is the Congress going to do, and what is the administration going to do? Because we've got to do something more. The HAMP program, for a lot of reasons, didn't turn out to be as big as we wanted it to be. None of these programs are. What are we going to do to actually do it? Because, until, and I think the point of your question is, until we get the housing market stabilized and turned around, and until we get the unemployment, we're not going to work our way out of this.
Well, I essentially still have the same question. The HAMP program or the FHA programs, essentially they're just transferring the losses from the banks to either a later time at the banks if they stay on the bank's books, or effectively to the taxpayer through the FHA or ultimately through the nationalized GSEs. And I don't understand how you're expecting to stabilize housing over some reasonable period of time if we continue sort of with this can kicking.
That's what I agree, but the point I'm making is in terms of this hearing today and the discussions at TARP, we're through kicking the can. The can ended being kicking on October the 3rd in terms of TARP money being able to spend on any major new federal program. So I'm saying your questions and points are good ones. They just have to be addressed under a different aegis than the TARP.
I understand.
It's just a jurisdictional thing. That's all I'm saying. I think these are good questions.
It's a point taken, Senator. But, essentially what you're saying is that TARP can't do any more right now because it's finished.
That's exactly right. But I think David's points are points that really should be answered. It's just not
we haven't resolved
for this particular situation.
Right.
I think it's very, very important, David. I think you're right on point. I really do.
Two people who agree. Senator, always good to see you.